There's an election to the Legislative Council coming soon, and Paul Craine MLC is looking for votes. Is the role of the council changing? What are the Keys members looking for, and how do they decide? Mr Craine was elected in November 21, shortly after the general election, and certainly has been vocal since then. So what does he want to achieve, and what can he offer? Is Mr Craine doing a good job and worth a further 5 years? Is it time for fresh faces? Or do you think it doesn't matter who gets in, as they're only in it for themselves? Paul, it's fair to say that you've decided you want to stand again. You've served how long?
It'll be 15 months by the time we reach the end of it, from November 2021.
OK, and I suppose, the first question then would be, how have you found it? Is it, because obviously you stood for the Keys twice, and you weren't successful on those occasions, but you must have had some thinking as to what it was going to be like when you became a member of Tynwald. Is what you thought anything close to what the reality is?
I suppose it's yes and no, really. Yes, I stood twice for the Keys and the door didn't open, and I thought that was the end of any political aspiration. I said so on the night, that I wouldn't stand again. I didn't stand the next time round. I'd done other things, including working on the Isle of Man Population Atlas and so on. And yes, when I got approached to see what I consider standing for Legislative Council, I went through that process and found myself in Tynwald. What was it like? I was stunned, I think, is probably the fair thing to say. Having given up on political aspiration, there I was in Tynwald on the corner of the Legislative Council sort of bench there. And I was stunned. It's a mighty, mighty privilege to be in there. It's hugely challenging, terrific responsibility if you stop for a minute and think about it. And a lot of hard work to keep on top of what's going on all the time.
And you have been very visible. Various members of LegCo seem to adopt different styles. It is fair to say that you're one of the members of Legislative Council that over the course of the last 12 months people will have heard of and heard from.
Yes, it's hard to evaluate that when you're in it, but I guess the two areas I've been most involved in have been climate change, which is one of or perhaps the biggest global issue that's hitting the planet. And so that is a high-profile issue. And then the other issue has been the island's population, which is possibly the biggest issue facing the Isle of Man and the future over the next 5 years or so. So in both of those areas, I had been involved in speaking out before I was a member, and I've continued to speak out, though with a different angle and slightly different hat on maybe, but I'm happy to speak out without being outspoken, if that makes sense.
Well, it's I suppose the people it has to make sense to are the members of the House of Keys. This is an unusual sort of election broadcast in as much as the electorate largely will know you and will most likely have decided whether they think they're going to give you a vote at this stage. Clearly there's a whole load of candidates likely to come forward over the course of the next month or two as well. But have you got an understanding? Is there a common theme as to what members of the House of Keys are looking for from the Legislative Council, or is it a mixed bag?
It is a mixed bag, undoubtedly. I base that on having met with not quite all of the members, but most of the members last time round. This time I'm still at a fairly early stage. I've got another meeting this afternoon and a few lined up for next week. But without a doubt, you do get different views as to what the role of Legislative Council should be, how large it should be, whether Legislative Council members should serve in departments or whether they should be just on committees, and the extent to which they can maintain their independence for scrutiny. If they're in departments, those questions get asked, and the extent to which they should be involved primarily in legislative scrutiny, which in these last 13, 14 months to this point, we haven't had a great deal of legislation going through. There was a new administration, of course, and it's just gathering momentum now, really. We were looking at the principal stage of one bill and the clauses stage of a second bill last week, and this is moving forward quite quickly now.
And in terms of your your choice. You've decided to stay outside of any government department at the moment.
I think going forward, I'm open on that. It's one of the things I'm discussing with those that I meet, and the meetings I've had so far have been mixed. Some saying, getting into the department, you'll see much more of what's going on. Give you a better understanding and so on. And I can see that side to it. The opportunities to get into departments have not been that many in this period, because having arrived in November 2021, the new administration had been elected, the general election in the September, and then the chief minister elected, and then all the roles filled, really. So the opportunities to be in departments were more restricted. So, as I said, I've been heavily involved on climate change transformation. I'm deputy chair of the Climate Change Transformation Board, and having seen what was coming in the census and seeing the census results, I put forward the motion on population rebalancing, and there was a select committee formed on that. So I've been serving on that. Michelle Hayward has been chairing that, and we've been moving forward on that. And in the midst of that, then the KPMG economic strategy report came through with the suggestion, the proposal that the population be raised to 100,000, which came in like a tsunami at the time to a select committee working on trying to work on rebalancing. So the population's been a big issue in there. But I've been involved in other things too, the Tynwald briefings that take place. I'm frequently active in those, and I certainly am following a line of looking for evidence-based decision-making, so looking at the data. And it's been interesting as we've gone through the launch of the island plan to see departmental plans coming through, and sometimes they're rich in data, rich in evidence, and the decisions are clearly evidence-based, and other times they're not that far on, and they're looking to get their baseline sorted before they can look at what their targets might be. So, I've worked hard on the data side of things, but in the Keys I've spoken on a very wide, in Tynwald I've spoken on a very wide range of issues, from brownfield sites to ferry terminal to all sorts of things, really. I haven't restricted that. I've always been prepared, and I've tried to speak in ways that are constructive but challenging. That's what good scrutiny is.
In the past, it's fair to say Legislative Council was there perhaps to provide a kind of a backstop for Keys. It was generally staffed with people who had either been for a long time members of the House of Keys or had very significant experience working in areas relating to government. That's clearly changed dramatically over the past 2, possibly 3 Legislative Council elections. So what is the actual purpose of Legislative Council now in relation to how LegCo and Keys interact, at least?
It has some key roles to play. I think in terms of legislation, it does mean that when the 24 members of the Keys have sat and looked at legislation and gone through the clauses stage of it, and they've looked very closely at it, it then gets taken out of that situation and put in front of another group of 11 people, 2 of which are ex officio without votes, but 9 voting people, and they look at it completely afresh. They will have an awareness of what happened in the Keys, and they will be aware of the amendments that were made in the Keys and why they were made. But this is further thinking on this bill coming from without having been influenced by what happened in the Keys, and offering new insights into it, and that's possible. I've got an amendment at the moment that we're working on in relation to the animal welfare bill, and that's something that is being looked at. The thoughts that I had not been part of the Keys discussion, but they will of course end up, if the amendment is made, it will go back to the Keys, and they'll have their thoughts on that. But I think that sort of legislative scrutiny is strong. It's powerful. It's better than just having the one body going through with one set of thinking about it. But there are other roles too, such as the committee's work I mentioned, climate change transformation. Different members bring an enormous range of different skills to it. There's a sense in which I work on climate change and population, but my real professional expertise, if you like, is education. You know, I was in education for 40 years. I was an Ofsted inspector at the Island Senior Secondary Advisement, and that's where my real sort of professional background lies. But I'm very happy to be working in these two areas and engaging in any way that I can.
The previous Chief Minister very publicly rebuked members of Legislative Council when he felt they were coming out of line with government. Do you think either since then, or maybe this is just a new philosophy, that maybe LegCo Legislative Council has become too timid in the way in which it approaches its work?
I don't see that timidity. I don't see that. I'm not quite sure how it felt previously in the last administration, but I would see nothing other than encouragement for members of LegCo to engage, and some of them are in departments, some in more than one department. Some of them are then involved in taking legislation with that department through Legislative Council. So there's a range of different roles that are being played there. But I think we're encouraged. We're encouraged to attend the briefings. Speaking at the briefings is absolutely open to us, and the briefings are useful because it's usually when you're getting your first sight of something coming, and you can ask really silly questions in private of the briefing, if you like, and feel your way around what's there and raise issues to it. And so I think the Legislative Council members are encouraged to engage, so long as, I think the phrase that was used to me when I first elected, the phrase was used that it would not be appropriate for members of Legislative Council to take the lead on policy. And that's perhaps sound advice. The reality is we don't have the same mandate that members of the Keys do. We haven't been publicly elected. They have, and although we've been indirectly elected by the Keys members, we're there to support them, supporting in a broad sense of the term, because it's a support that involves scrutiny and challenge. But that's what we're there to do, to support the parliamentarians in the Keys.
And presumably, by not taking the lead on policy, okay, that's one thing. You don't create new policies, but your role is very firmly and clearly to say, when you see a new policy coming along and think it's an unworkable or mad idea, your role is to say, actually, wait a minute, have you thought about this, that and the other? And then it is for Keys to perhaps reconsider and potentially come up with answers and say, yes, we have thought about this. You might think it's a silly idea, but we're going to crack on anyway.
Yes, particularly through the meetings of Tynwald, which is where policy and finance are being discussed. So the policy issues are there being laid out. There's a debate going on with different members making contributions. And yes, it's totally appropriate for members of Legislative Council to join in with that, preferably in constructive ways, as I say.
Have you managed to get the right work-life balance? Do you actually get any time off, or is it a full-on, full-time?
It's full-on, full-time because you never stop thinking about it. One of the things that I keep saying is that if I'm re-elected for a 5-year term next time, I was used to a pattern where 3 mornings a week I would get into swim. I'd be in the NSC pool. That's gone by the wayside. Even though I've paid the year's subscription, it's just disappeared, because the day starts with looking through your emails and things like that, and thoughts that you've got in mind and jobs still to be done. So yes, it is the sort of role that could completely take you over, really, and that's you've got to guard against that, because self-preservation it has to be part of this.
And it's not just self-preservation either. I mean, obviously I can speak with a little bit of experience on this too. I think if you are so engaged, so totally and wholly engaged with this, the risk is that you lose touch with the people that you're there to represent, and also you potentially become so tired and jaded that you aren't able to give the matters that you are there to deal with the appropriate consideration.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're standing for LegCo. You want to be a member of the Legislative Council for another 5 years. What do you want to achieve over that 5-year period?
I think the big things I'd like to achieve, and I don't think these would be policy issues as such. I would like to see movement for government to use data better, to gather better data, to use the data in more appropriate ways, more analytical, more evidence-based. And so I'm always on the lookout for good use of data, which we sometimes see some excellent use. Some of the departmental reports coming through are well on track in that direction. Where you see the data not yet fully embedded, and there may be many good reasons for that, but to try and support taking that forward and seeing the data, the most appropriate data being collected, good baseline information there, good data on how you move forward, and being aspirational about it. One of the things that has struck me in the 14 months I think I've done so far, one of the things that struck me is how slowly things can move, even when you think you're running. You look back and say, well, why did that go so slowly? And it's sometimes hard to judge, but so getting things done. Where we're at now. When I joined Legislative Council, we were just 2 or 3 months into the new administration, but now things have moved on, and we're 18 months into this new administration, and everybody says the last year of the administration gets more difficult because there's an election coming up. So these next 2 years, 2.5 years, absolutely crucial that we're delivering. The idea that does the Isle of Man government have good direction? Yes, we have got good direction. The Island Plan is an ambitious plan. It's still being fleshed out as we go through the process of merging the economic strategy to the Island Plan. But there is direction there, and it is direction that's broad, that's integrated, that's linking population and economy and government income, and right across these areas it's there. But delivering that in 2.5 years, or as far as you can. I know some parts of the Island Plan run beyond the population intentions that came out of KPMG's economic strategy, run through to 2037 and so on. So some parts of this are aspirational beyond the current administration. But that's of necessity. It would be good if, as we move towards the end of this administration, if we've got data in place so that a new administration with new ministers and so on don't come in saying, well, what are we going to do? What have we? If there's some clear data and evidence there, and the direction of travel is clear because the data is showing it, that should take away the sort of hiatus of a period where you're looking around again and trying to decide what your key priorities are for the next 5 years. So they're the areas I'd like to contribute to, as well as the population issue, which is still deepening, and the climate change issue, which is massive and will still be around for the next 30 years.
I imagine, having listened to what you've said, there may be 1 or 2 former senior officers of government, maybe a former minister or chief minister or 2 listening in and saying, Paul Craine undermines the work that we did by suggesting that we didn't rely on data. Presumably that's not what you mean.
No, that would be a twist of what I'm saying. The data doesn't stand still, of course. The data needs to be being evaluated all the way. If you go back to where the last administration was with population, the data's been changing these last 5 years, and therefore you're looking afresh at it annually all the way through and being clear. I think in the past, as the island has moved into whether you call it strategic plans or island plans, whatever, There is a difficulty, and this is not being critical. I recognise how hard it is. There is a difficulty establishing what your key performance indicators are, separate from what the ongoing work of the department is, or whichever committee or whatever. Separate from the ongoing work, sorting out what the key performance indicators were and which of those absolutely matter. Which are the ones you've got to give the highest priority to, put resources into, monitor carefully, get the data. So I'm saying we can improve in those areas. Yeah, I believe that.
In terms of the key performance indicators, the targets, the aspiration of government, the things that they shall achieve by the next election, do you think they are clear enough and relevant enough in terms of the obvious needs that the people declared in advance of the last election, and indeed the subsequent concerns that have been delivered in relation, or appeared in relation to the cost of living crisis? Do you think it's clear enough? Because a number of the aspirations are big and bold and long term, which they potentially need to be. But then that brings us past the next election. So effectively, the big bold aspiration is some long distance into the future, and effectively, come the next election, ministers, members of Keys could say, yes, well, we're working towards this, rather than actually necessarily having to have achieved anything.
I think that's where. My understanding of the Island Plan is that what the Island Plan sets out is at a relatively high level, and it does give absolute clear direction of where we're trying to get to in relation to climate change, in relation to the economy and so on. But it then becomes up to the departments to break down their areas of that. So it's all very well centrally saying we've got a target of reducing carbon emissions 35% by 2030, but how does that happen? And that's where there's a climate change action plan, and that's where individual departments are then looking at how they can reduce their carbon emissions. So you would like them to have a good understanding of where they're at, what the baseline of their emissions are at, and there's still work to be done on that, in fairness, and then a drive to achieve that by 2026, within the current administration. So you're chunking it down, really, and you're looking at the bigger picture and saying, what do we need to get done in this period? And the climate change is a great one to look at, because it affects transport and building regulations and housing and all sorts, to take that forward. And the completion of the plan very much relies on the departmental plans getting down to the detail of that. If centrally you're trying to run with 200 KPIs, well, that is going to come unstuck at some point. So you are looking for departments to be prioritising this and handling the data, and that's where, if I'm re-elected, I'd like to be sort of more directly involved, perhaps in supporting a department or two, looking at their data, so not necessarily engaging with the department's political decisions, but helping to gather the evidence to support those.
Is there one structural change that you'd like to make in relation to how Legislative Council and Tynwald work?
No, I think the Isle of Man is sometimes at its worst, or Tynwald is at its worst, when it's looking at its own structures. I think the one thing I'd like to see is getting the delivery for the plans that are there.
That was Paul Craine MLC, who will be seeking re-election in the forthcoming LegCo election. Do you think it's right for someone who failed twice to be elected to the Keys to get an electorate-free pass into Tynwald? Or is it more important to look at the calibre and capability of potential candidates? Let me know your thoughts and views on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn. Goramayo. Thanks for listening.